When the camera's red light blinked on, no one in the studio had the slightest idea that the easy, predictable rhythm of a late-night interview was about to collapse in real time. The audience settled into their seats expecting the usual banter, while Bill Maher rested behind his desk with the relaxed posture of a host who had survived every kind of guest mood imaginable. The night was supposed to run on rails, introduce Robert Darrow, chat about the new movie, sprinkle in a few jokes, close out the show. But the second Robert walked through the curtain, an uneasy current rippled across the room. Like, before we move on, don't forget to hit subscribe button. He carried the presence of a seasoned actor, yet something about him felt volatile, as if he had arrived carrying an argument instead of a promotional talking point. He barely acknowledged the applause before dropping into the chair with the stiff posture of someone preparing for a confrontation. Bill greeted him warmly, hoping to melt whatever tension Robert brought with him, and for a moment it looked like the conversation might stabilize. Then Bill mentioned the actor's recent political remarks, and Robert's entire demeanor hardened. His jaw tightened, his shoulders rose, and the atmosphere grew dense enough that even the audience sensed the shift. "I'm not here to get cornered about that," Robert shot back, crossing his arms like a barricade. Bill attempted to reassure him, explaining that the show wasn't trying to lure him into controversy, but this only seemed to heighten Robert's agitation. The crowd leaned forward, unsure whether they were witnessing genuine friction or a dramatic performance. When Bill clarified that he simply wanted a discussion, Robert's frustration detonated. He accused Bill of treating his guests like spectacle fuel, his voice sharp enough to slice the silence that followed. The room froze. Even the crew held still, instinctively recognizing that this was no longer an awkward moment, but the edge of a full-scale unraveling. Bill stayed calm, maintaining the steady demeanor that had carried him through countless heated conversations, but his gentleness only seemed to irritate Robert further. The actor let out a dry, humorless laugh and abruptly stood, the scrape of his chair jolting the audience. He began pacing in tight, restless circles, throwing accusations about manipulation, spin, and the media's appetite for outrage. Bill, still seated, watched with quiet concern and asked him to sit back down so they could talk through whatever was clearly weighing on him. But this suggestion only pushed Robert deeper into agitation. His voice climbed with each sentence, insisting that he had walked into a setup, that the whole environment was engineered to squeeze him into headlines. The contrast between Bill's calm responses and Robert's escalating turmoil made the moment feel strangely unreal, like two conversations overlapping out of sync. Eventually, Robert stopped pacing and leaned over the desk, staring Bill down with an intensity that made the studio lights seem brighter, harsher. The crew exchanged panicked looks, unsure whether to cut to commercial or let the scene play out. The audience sat silent, barely breathing, witnessing a man's composure slip away under the pressure of the spotlight. Bill finally placed his note cards aside and spoke with gentle firmness, telling Robert that he had always treated him with respect and genuinely didn't understand why tonight felt different. Something in those words cracked the last layer of Robert's defenses. His expression twisted into something rawer than anger, something closer to exhaustion or fear. He fired back one last accusation, louder than the rest, as if volume alone could hold him together. But as the echo faded, so did his fury. His voice faltered, and for the first time, the audience saw the strain beneath the outburst. He steadied himself on the edge of the desk, breathing unevenly, as though everything he'd been holding inside had suddenly lost its scaffolding. Bill softened his tone even further. "Robert," he said, no longer sounding like a host addressing a guest, but like a person speaking to someone who had reached the end of his rope, "what's really going on?" Robert seemed on the verge of exploding again, but the anger never returned. Instead, a tired, defeated look crossed his face. He shook his head slowly, eyes blinking against the glare, and finally managed, "I can't keep doing this." Every interview, every headline, they twist everything. I feel like I'm being shredded every time I talk. Bill nodded gently, telling him they could pause the show, step away from the cameras, and talk without the pressure of an audience. The offer lingered in the air like a lifeline. Robert hesitated, looking around the studio as though noticing for the first time how many eyes and lenses were pointed at him. His breath shuddered. Bill glanced toward the booth and said quietly, "Cut the feed." The red light above the camera flicked off, and although the broadcast ended there, the moment Robert's unraveling, the sudden fracture of a public persona, would continue echoing in conversations, clips, and speculation long after the studio fell silent. The studio lights dimmed slightly as the cameras powered down, but the tension in the room didn't ease. Without the buffer of a live broadcast, the silence felt even heavier, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Crew members hovered uncertainly at the edges of the set, unsure whether to step in or stay invisible. Bill leaned forward, elbows on the desk, his voice low and steady. "Robert, talk to me. Not the cameras. Me." Robert's shoulders rose and fell in a shaky breath. The anger that had carried him moments ago had drained out completely, leaving a hollow, unsettled fatigue behind. He sank back into his chair, the movement slow and deliberate, like every muscle had finally given up resisting. For a few seconds, he said nothing. His gaze drifted across the emptying audience rows, past the overhead rigging, past the teleprompters, anywhere but at Bill. "I'm tired, man," he finally muttered, barely loud enough for anyone to hear. "I'm tired of feeling like every word I say gets turned into ammunition." Bill nodded, giving him space. "That pressure can chew you up if you don't give yourself room to breathe." Robert let out a short, bitter laugh. "Room to breathe? I can't even say good morning without someone accusing me of having an agenda. I walk into an interview, and before I sit down, I'm already the villain in someone's story." He ran a hand through his hair, fingers trembling slightly. "I used to love this job. Now I don't know what I'm doing anymore." Bill studied him with quiet concern. He'd seen guests get emotional, get combative, get overwhelmed, but this was different. This wasn't an ego bruised by a tough question. This was a man worn down by months, maybe years, of relentless scrutiny. Bill stood and stepped around the desk, taking a seat in the empty chair beside Robert instead of across from him. The gesture wasn't grand, but it mattered. It changed the geometry of the moment. "Listen," Bill said gently, "you're not trapped here. You don't owe anyone a performance right now. If you need to walk off this set, you walk. If you need to talk, I'm here. But nobody is going to twist whatever you say next. Not tonight." Robert closed his eyes for a moment, as if testing whether he could trust the quiet. The hum of the studio equipment filled the space between them. A few audience members remained frozen in their seats, not out of curiosity, but out of a kind of stunned empathy. Slowly, Robert nodded. "I didn't come here planning to blow up," he said softly. I've been carrying so much, and the minute you brought up those comments, it felt like everything was about to start all over again." "I get it," Bill replied, "but you're not alone in this, even if it feels like it." A long silence followed, not tense, just human, the sort of silence that lets someone finally exhale. "You know what the worst part is?" Robert whispered. "I don't even know what I'm supposed to feel anymore. Angry? Hurt? Defensive? I just keep reacting, and I hate how I've been reacting." Bill nodded slowly. "Maybe tonight is the moment you stop reacting and start talking. Really talking. Not for the cameras, not for the press. For you." Robert let out a long breath, the kind that shakes loose something buried deep. For the first time since stepping on stage, he looked genuinely present, not cornered or combative, just a man exhausted by the weight of his own public shadow. And then, almost unexpectedly, he said, "Can we clear the room?" Bill signaled to the crew. No questions, no hesitation. People began to file out quietly, leaving the set in soft, echoing stillness. As the last door clicked shut, Robert leaned back, eyes unfocused but clearer than before. "All right," he murmured. "Let's talk." And for the first time that night, the conversation finally began. The studio, now emptied of its applause and its witnesses, felt strangely larger. Without the audience or the crew, the space lost its performance glow and settled into something more intimate, almost too intimate. The overhead lights dimmed to their standby warmth, leaving Bill and Robert in a soft, quiet halo of illumination. For a long moment, neither spoke. Bill didn't push. He simply sat beside Robert, giving the silence permission to stretch until Robert could find the words he'd been choking on all night. Eventually, Robert rubbed his palms together, a nervous, repetitive motion that betrayed years of pressure he had never allowed himself to acknowledge. "You know," he began, voice low, "I used to think I was tough enough to handle anything. Press tours, critics, tabloids, whatever. I thought it all came with the territory." Bill listened without interrupting, but somewhere along the way, Robert continued, "I stopped being a person to people. I became this symbol, something they could tear apart or defend, depending on whatever they needed at the time." He shook his head. "It's like I'm not allowed to make a mistake, or have an opinion, or even have a bad day." Bill rested his hands on his knees. "That's the trap of fame nobody warns you about. You get the spotlight, but the spotlight gets you too." Robert let out a humorless breath. "Exactly. And tonight, when you mentioned those comments, I knew you didn't mean anything by it. I know you. I've been on this show before, but my brain just snapped. Like I was back in those interviews where they kept twisting my words, baiting me, turning me into a headline before before I even finished the sentence. Bill nodded. You reacted out of fear, not anger. Maybe both. Robert's voice cracked slightly, surprising even him. He blinked hard, staring at the darkened audience rows. I've been carrying this weight for months, trying to outshout the noise, trying to prove I'm still in control of something. But the truth is, I'm not. I'm exhausted, and I don't know who to be anymore without everyone else telling me. Bill leaned back in his chair, folding his arms, not defensively, but thoughtfully. You don't have to be anything right now except honest. Nobody's recording, nobody's watching, so start with this. What do you need? Robert frowned, caught off guard by the question. He opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. I think I need to breathe without performing. I need to remember who I am when I'm not defending myself. Bill nodded. That's a start. Robert hesitated, then added, and maybe I need to step away, just for a bit, before I lose myself completely. Nothing wrong with that, Bill said. Stepping back isn't failure, it's maintenance. Robert exhaled a long breath as though relieved someone had finally given him permission he didn't know he was waiting for. For the first time that night, his shoulders lowered, no longer braced for impact. Bill watched the change, the subtle but unmistakable shift from survival mode to something vulnerable but real. You know, Bill said gently, what happened out there? Yeah, it was rough. But it doesn't have to define you. People break sometimes. You're human. Robert gave a small, shaky smile. Feels like I haven't been allowed to be human in a long time. Tonight, Bill said, you took that back. Another quiet moment hung between them, this time not heavy, but grounding. Robert looked around the now motionless set, as if seeing it clearly for the first time. You think the network's gonna freak out? He asked softly. Bill let out a soft chuckle. Probably, but I'll handle the suits. Robert smiled a little more genuinely this time. Thanks. Anytime, Bill replied. You're not alone in this, no matter how much it feels like you are. Robert inhaled deeply, then stood, slower and steadier than before. Bill rose with him. They shook hands, not as host and guest, but as two people who had met somewhere raw and unfiltered. For the first time all evening, Robert's eyes looked calm. Tired, yes, but calm. I think I'm gonna head out, he said. Clear my head. Good, Bill said. Do that. Robert started toward the exit, but paused halfway, glancing back at the dimmed set. You know, he said quietly, tonight might have been the worst moment of my career, but maybe it's the first honest one I've had in years. Bill smiled softly. Honesty's a pretty solid place to rebuild from. Robert nodded, then continued toward the door, disappearing into the hallway beyond. The studio stayed silent long after he left, as if honoring the weight of what had just happened. And somehow, for the first time all night, the silence didn't feel broken. It felt healing. Bill remained in the quiet studio for a while after Robert disappeared down the hallway. He stood there, hands in his pockets, taking in the stillness that had replaced what only an hour earlier had been a pulsing, restless room full of anticipation. The empty chairs, the muted monitors, the idle cameras. It all felt like the aftermath of a storm, not destructive, but cleansing in a strange way. Eventually, Bill turned toward the stage entrance, giving a nod to the few remaining crew members who lingered nearby. They exchanged subtle, uncertain glances, each of them aware they had witnessed something fragile and unfiltered, something that wasn't meant to be broadcast or dissected. Bill gave them a gentle signal that everything was fine, and one by one, they drifted off to finish packing up equipment or quietly leave the studio. As he walked backstage, Bill spotted his stage manager leaning against a lighting crate, headset resting around his neck. The man straightened as Bill approached. You good? He asked quietly. Bill gave a small, thoughtful shrug. Yeah, just thinking. About cutting the feed. About the human being sitting across from me. Bill corrected. The stage manager nodded, relieved. I think you did the right thing, Bill. Honestly, I don't think the country needed to watch that part. Bill sighed. Neither did he. The hallway beyond the stage was dim and mostly empty, the usual post-show bustle replaced by a subdued quiet. Bill made his way toward his dressing room, but halfway there he slowed. Ahead, he saw Robert sitting alone on a bench near the emergency exit, elbows on his knees, staring down at the floor. The actor didn't notice Bill at first. The overhead fluorescent lights cast a pale glow across his face, revealing exhaustion that went deeper than a long day. Bill considered walking past, giving Robert the space he'd said he needed, but something made him stop. He approached slowly, giving a small verbal cue so he wouldn't startle him. Didn't expect you to still be here. Robert lifted his head, expression softer now, almost apologetic. "I'm not avoiding you," he said. "Just needed a minute before facing the outside world again." Bill leaned against the wall beside him. "No rush. Nobody's waiting with pitchforks." Robert huffed a tiny laugh. "Give them time." For a moment, they simply existed in the quiet. No cameras, no pressure, just two men at the tail end of a long night. "You know," Robert said after a while, "when I walked out on that stage, I thought I had everything under control. I was telling myself I could power through it, be charming, be professional." He shook his head. "Turns out I was hanging on by threads I didn't even realize were fraying." "Threads snap," Bill said. "Doesn't make you weak, makes you human." Robert looked genuinely grateful at that. "I think I forgot that somewhere along the way." "We all do," Bill replied, "especially people who are expected to be invincible." Another silence settled, but it was gentler this time. "You going home?" Bill asked. "Eventually. I called my driver, told him to take the long way." Robert leaned back against the bench, eyes drifting upward. "I'm not ready to walk back into the world pretending everything's fine, not tonight." "Then don't pretend," Bill said. "Take the night, take a week, take whatever you need." Robert closed his eyes briefly. "You know what scares me the most? Not the headlines, not the gossip. It's that I don't remember the last time I felt like myself." Bill nodded slowly. "Then maybe tonight wasn't a breakdown," he said quietly. "Maybe it was the moment you finally stopped running from that." Robert opened his eyes, meeting Bill's. For the first time all night, there was a spark of clarity behind them. Not confidence, but the beginning of something steadier. Acceptance. "Thanks," he said, "for not making a spectacle of me." "Never would have done that," Bill said. "Not to you." Robert looked down at his hands, turning them over as if surprised to find them steady again. "I owe you one." "You don't owe me anything," Bill said simply. "Just take care of yourself." Robert nodded, thoughtful. I think I actually will." The hallway remained still, holding the moment gently. Then Robert stood, straightening his coat with a new sense of calm. "I'll see you around," he said. Bill gave a small smile. "Your chair'll be waiting." Robert smiled back, quiet, sincere, then pushed the door open and stepped out into the cool night beyond. Bill watched him go, the faint sound of distant traffic drifting inside before the door closed again. And as the hallway returned to silence, Bill knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever Robert faced next, tonight had given him a chance. Not for escape, but for renewal. The kind that starts not with applause, but with honesty. If you like this video, then subscribe.